thank you very much. Thank you all for coming in. The Columbian is pleased to welcome representatives of the Oregon Department of Transportation. We are here to talk about that state's plan for placing tolls upon I-5 and 205. And let's see, we appreciate you joining us. We understand that this issue, it would take place in Oregon, but obviously it would impact our readers a great deal. So there's a lot of local interest in that. I'm Greg Jane, the editorial page editor, and I think you met Craig Brown, Metro editor, also a member of the editorial board. And sitting in on this meeting is reporter Damian Pasanti. He won't be asking questions here, but was interested in meeting with you and sitting in here, and he might want to speak with you later. So to start out with, we'll just go around the table, introduce yourselves very quickly, and explain your role very briefly, and we'll start at this end.
Okay. Orlando Simpson. I am a Department of Transportation Commissioner, as well as 49% co-chair of the Value Pricing Committee.
Sean O'Halloran, I serve on the Oregon Transportation Commission and co-chair along with Orlando.
Okay.
And my name's Ryan Winsheimer. I'm the ODOT Region 1 manager, so I'm responsible for ODOT activities within Multnomah, Washington, Clackamas, and Hood River counties. And I also sit on RTC, and so I participate in the Vancouver MPO piece as well.
That's Regional Transportation Council.
Yeah.
Mandy Putney, Policy and Development Manager for Region 1, supporting Ryan's efforts.
Okay. And I am Don Hamilton. I'm the Public Information Officer for the Portland area for ODOT.
Right. Well, again, thank you all for coming in. And just so you know, we are videotaping this. We will post it unedited on our website for the benefit of our readers. Just so you know. So to start out with, just if one of you could give us a quick synopsis of the issues involved in what Oregon is trying to adopt as a plan.
Yeah, you want me to? I'll dive in.
One of the chairs.
Sure, I'll dive in, and Orlando, you correct me. So I think, like Washington, Oregon has seen a lot of population growth. We live in a great part of the country, a great part of the world, and I think our transportation infrastructure has not kept up with our population growth and the demand, and we've tried to be creative and put in new systems and ways to move people and goods around. We have a great river that between our two awesome states, and people need to get across it, and stuff needs to get through it. But I think, like Washington, Oregon has tried to figure out how to address the issue and be progressive on it. The state legislature, following a series of going around the state meetings that took place over the course of a couple of years, in trying to represent the interests of all modes of transportation and all regions of the state, and they found a couple things that were pretty obvious. And obviously we had to maintain the system we had. We had to upgrade it. We had to address seismic concerns, transit. Everyone wanted to get around, but really learning that Portland area congestion was an issue to everyone in the state, and that we had to do something about it. Our bridges are kind of a natural nexus to trying to address that. In part of the legislative package, which was $5.3 billion, the legislature tasked us as the commission and to look into congestion pricing as one of the means to get after it. So obviously this is a holistic problem, and there's not a silver bullet solution to it, but to put on the table a multitude of options for our consideration to try to do something about it. Obviously transit's a component of it, carpooling's a component of it, building more lanes is a component of it, looking at how we do tolling and congestion pricing, and as you guys are well familiar, the bridge we have very close to us at some point is going to need replacement, and I don't think that people from Vancouver enjoy sitting in traffic any more than people in Portland or any other part of the country. And so I think we want to look at it holistically as a community and figure out what are our options to address it, and can we implement tolling or congestion pricing as a way to help address the problem and potentially look at capacity concerns and try to ease the problem and do a little bit better job at catching up with our population growth as we're way behind the curve. So I'll just throw that out as kind of the
Real
foundational.
Quick follow-up on that. What is the difference between tolling and congestion pricing?
Well, I think I'll take a crack at it, and you guys again correct me. I think congestion pricing is perhaps looked at more behavioral, where you're trying to have cost and at times when traffic is at peak, and in ways to incentivize other modes of transportation, people to get together and carpool, people to use transit, people to telecommute.
So does that mean during peak hours the tolls would be higher?
I think that's a consideration, right? I don't think it's been determined, but yes, and that's how some cities do it. And I think actually one of the examples we're looking at that's closest at hand is what Seattle's done. And so WashDOT and what Seattle has done is, they have implemented tolling in a number of places and have implemented congestion pricing. Tolling would be you go over a bridge, you pay a fee, and that fee doesn't. I guess you could have variable pricing on the tolling, but typically you go over a bridge, you pay a bridge of the gods. You go over it, you pay a toll to get across it. So I think that's what tolling is. You use a specific corridor, you pay a price. New Jersey, New York, all their roads are toll roads, and you use them, you pay to be on them. And I think it's really historically and traditionally user fee based. If you use the system, you pay for it. And there's only a handful of ways to do that. Oregon has historically relied heavily on fuel taxes. As vehicles become more efficient, that's become less feasible to pay for everything that we do. We've been creative about how we look at trucking and with weight distance mile systems in place to try to basically have trucks pay for the wear and tear they put on the road and the distance they travel. So I think trying to be creative on it, but getting to the heart of your question, congestion pricing, I would say might be more behavioral and might really be imposed at you determine the times and historically would be peak traffic hours. Tolling might be just very specific on a bridge or a corridor.
Yeah.
So,
and just to quickly, just as a quickly follow up to that.
Let me clarify really quickly that the commission was called for by the legislature. You guys are merely considering all options at this point. Nothing has been finalized.
Absolutely. So I think how the legislature worked. So the Oregon Transportation Commission oversees the Oregon Department of Transportation. It's a 5-member commission appointed by the governor, confirmed by the state senate, and intended to represent all geographies in the state. And so we have been tasked under the legislature to come up with the congestion pricing.
It's just under the consideration.
Yeah,
point.
It's not, and we will. So what we've tried to do is have a series of listening sessions and to get the input of all stakeholders, and to obviously Vancouver area residents are a major stakeholder in this discussion. And
you came over here and had at least one session, I know.
Yeah, and I think, look, if we weren't two different states, if you removed the political boundary of our two states, we'd be having this discussion as one community, saying, how do we get after this? We are all Oregonians coming this way, then Washington residents going that way. We are all stuck in a logjam. Anytime someone wants to go across that bridge, and at some point we've got to look at how we modernize it. We know the infrastructure is pretty old. We've had the debate recently, and maybe we have it when the bridge falls into the river. But at some point, we're gonna have this discussion again. But I think this is and trying to look at it holistically and long term. How do we do this? And making an assumption that people on this side of the river enjoy no less sitting in traffic than people who live on that side of the river. And
we'll
looking.
get to our thoughts
Yeah.
about this side of the river. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Ryan.
That's okay. I just wanted to supplement what Commissioner Holler mentioned, which is congestion pricing is really it's a subset of tolling, right? But the objective of it is to improve congestion, manage congestion, and there may be the answer about what is it, how much is it. Those are questions that we don't know the answer to yet, and it's part of our conversation. It could be implemented by time of day, so maybe it is a time of day. It could also be implemented by sort of the level of congestion. So the time when congestion is the worst, the toll may be higher. At a time when there's no congestion, there might not be a toll at all in order to use the facility. So it's really, if you use it as a tool to just manage traffic and try to manage demand, there very well may be times of day where it's not necessary to have a toll on there, and that it seems to be working fine. So there's a range of things still under consideration. Those are all the kinds of things we're talking about, and we're not ready to jump into answering those yet as to what it is. So now we're starting to have that dialogue about what might work, where might it work, what type of tolling seems like it might work. Those are all things that are on the table right now. So that's why we're out there reaching out to folks. And you mentioned did we get out? We had a great turnout at the library, 170 people. The one thing we heard at all of them was we agree congestion's a problem. And so the question then becomes, so how do we go about tackling that, and is this a tool that we ought to be moving forward with, and if so, where is really the question that we're at right now.
Any new ideas surfaced from these listening outposts that you've done, or has there been any kind of consensus or anything that you've seen so far?
We got a lot of responses. So and I think we have a spreadsheet of our public involvement stuff that we can share, but a lot of it was, hey, why don't you just go build more? Why don't you just talk to people and try to get them to do more telecommuting? There's been what about a different way to. There's been several different folks that come out with things, and I think part of what's important about House Bill 2017 is that it wasn't just saying just go do congestion pricing. They really did try to tackle the investment in transit. They spent a lot of time and effort investing in transit at a high level for the first time. And then we've also looked at a ton of projects, and so there's a lot of things in there around investment in Rose Quarter, investment in 217. We recently, when I talk to folks in Vancouver, they're always saying, well, what kinds of investments are you making in the roadway down there to make it better? We also just built that third lane at Delta Park not too many years ago, and that was a huge bottleneck where it went down to 2 lanes, and now it's got the third, and now we actually have a dedicated penny of gas tax revenue for Rose Quarter. So a lot of that money is there on the table as we continue to work through that project too.
With the Rose Quarter, no matter what ends up with the congestion pricing study.
Yes, and that investment is coming. We may need a little more than what we have right now programmed, but there is a plan to move forward with that project, regardless of the turnout of
and that
this
penny a
process.
gallon, that's statewide.
It is.
Now, from our perspective, the concern is the legislature, when it called for this, said tolls up to the state line, possibly. That, and to us, that would inequitably target Washington drivers. Do you have any idea the percentage of people who cross the bridge who are Washington residents? Have you looked into that? Anybody?
Well, the first thing I would say is the legislation gives us an area in which to consider tolling, and
Up to the state
and
line.
it says anywhere between the junction there at I-5 South near Tualatin and then up to the state line. And so that may mean all of it. It might mean from the state line to some point. It might mean over here in a different section of it. So
Right,
it's not
I
saying you have to
understand
toll
that,
at
but
the line.
I
It's
know.
just an area of consideration.
But do you know how many people who cross the bridge are Washington residents?
I believe, what's the number? A fifth, maybe 20%?
That
Well,
of the
cross
users?
I-5 or
For
205?
either bridges, I think it's around 70,000.
It's 70,000
What percent?
taxpayers. We know that there's combined the two bridges, it's about 280,000 average daily crossings a day.
Yeah, but
Right,
how many are
combined the two.
Vancouver
I don't think we
or
have
Oregon
those numbers.
residents?
We don't have any.
Washington residents,
Okay.
yeah.
Do you think it would be important to figure that out before, if you consider a toll on the state line?
I really don't. I think I think for us, we've got it's a user fee based system. If you're putting wear and tear on the road and on the bridges, I mean, those are the people who pay for it. So I mean, and if you're living in Portland, if you're living in Idaho, and you come across and go to Seattle, it's going to hit you just as equitably as if you live here.
Well,
So
to play devil's advocate, I think from our perspective, if somebody lives here and they work in downtown Portland, which a lot of people do, and for whatever reason they need to drive, they can't take transit every day, so they're crossing the bridge twice a day. From their perspective, if there is a toll at the state line, they're paying twice a day to cross that bridge when a lot of the benefits are going to the Abernathy Bridge or further down I-5 or 205 or areas that they very rarely travel. And they're paying twice a day
But-
for
well,
that.
I
Does
think-
that seem equitable?
Well,
Those are
first
yet
let me
to be
start by
determined.
saying we don't know that yet. You've made a number of assertions in what you just said.
I said
that,
if.
that are not determined yet. And so you're
Right.
saying if you pay here, the money would go there. We don't know that yet. We haven't had conversations about how that revenue is going to be divvied up. The part that is important, and we had this conversation at the open house, was, and there were people who said, I just don't care for a toll. I don't want to see a toll. There were other folks where we said, if you were willing to pay a toll and it was improve your trip, you'd be able to get there at 45 miles an hour the entire way. Is that valuable to you? And they said, heck yeah, I would love to. I would
Sure.
love to figure out how to make that happen.
And I think most
and I would be
people will.
willing, and I would be willing to pay that. And so there is a variety of folks with different perspectives, and what we're trying to understand now is taking all that into consideration. What makes sense?
Sure, and I think most people would agree with that. If they actually benefit from it, they would be willing to pay a toll or congestion pricing. But the concern is obviously Rose Quarter improvement would greatly help people here. Anybody who tries to drive downtown or through the city, that'd be beneficial. But if a big chunk of it ends up down at the Abernathy Bridge or further south on I-5 or 205, that would have minimal benefit for us up here. And I think that's the issue for Clark County.
Best practice around the country as value pricing and congestion pricing projects are being implemented is that the revenue, if there is additional revenue, that after it covers the cost of operations and maintenance, that it's used to improve that corridor. So that's pretty standard best practice.
Yeah, and right now there's currently 20% of our states are actually undergoing congestion pricing projects, and I believe there's at least 40 underway right now. So it gives notion that this obviously shift in this paradigm of how we're actually paying for our infrastructure for people to have a better experience, a better commute, a better trip. It seems to be going in that particular direction, given what Commissioner Holleran has identified earlier in terms of the gas tax model essentially kind of starting to degrade itself.
Yeah, and I can understand that. And like I said, I think people here would agree with that, the people who commute. As long as whatever plan is, if it's beneficial to us, I think you'd have support on this side of the river. But again, if it goes to a different part that local people don't use that often, there would be.
And I think you hit on the main
Some
part of
pushback.
what we're trying to find out, and that's why having the meeting up here was so helpful, was to hear people say things like, I would be if I benefited from it. If I could see the benefit from it, I may be willing to pay that toll. I might not do it every time, because maybe I'd be okay using a general purpose lane and taking a slower trip on days it doesn't make as much difference to me. But those days where I need to be at work on time or running late, that might be a valuable thing. So maybe we only told one of the lanes, and so you'd have that option, right? And so those are one of the things that, and so that's why we're having this conversation. And what you just said, I think, is really valuable, which is, if there is a benefit, who benefits? The person who benefits is the person who choosing to pay that toll, receives that benefit, is sort of a key component of making this acceptable.
And
What's the framework? I'm sorry. What's the framework of the time and the timeline for making the decision? You have a deadline by the end of the year, don't you?
yeah, we do.
Yes,
What
the
is
legislature
Recommended
set
December
set a
2018.
deadline for us. But what I would tell you about the deadline and what the commission is expecting a recommendation from the PAC on is, where should we start this conversation? Because it's really saying, where do we have the best opportunity to be successful? That's our objective in trying to understand from the PAC. And then
PAC is the Policy Advisory Committee.
yeah, I'm sorry. and then once that recommendation is sent to the OTC, and the OTC decides that's something that's worth exploring, then we start. That's when the real work begins on really trying to answer a lot of very detailed questions around equity, tolling. Does it generate the revenue we think it does? Does it really meet the objectives we think it does? That's a multi-year planning process, and so. The deadline that we have is really about trying to understand it as a tool, trying to understand public input and make sure we understand that, and then where should we start having this conversation? Where do we have the best chance to be successful? And then the real work of NEPA analysis and other things. There's a lot more work that's going to be done following that date. It's not like we're going to flip the switch in December and somehow start.
So the bulldozers won't be running.
There's no bulldozers getting fired up yet. So no.
I think fundamentally we have a choice to do something or to do nothing. If we do nothing, congestion continues to get worse. And if we do something, what is it? And all of the infrastructure investment that we need is expensive. It just doesn't happen for free, and we're struggling to figure out how we pay for it, how we address population growth, how we deal just getting people from point A to point B, and how we figure out how to make it a user fee based system, right? And arguably, if you buy your fuel here, you buy your car here, and you register it here, and you drive back and forth, you're paying nothing for it. So, I mean, I think that you've made a point about people wanting to invest in infrastructure where they get a return on that investment. So clearly, it's one of our objectives as well for people to see a benefit, to see congestion easing, to see a better bridge or better road, or to have transit options be more viable, and all of those things. So we're not coming to you with a list of answers, but what we want to do is make sure that we have the ability to assess what's feasible. We've made no determination on whether congestion pricing will work here. We want to model it out. We want to, as we're instructed to do by the Oregon legislature, model it out, to see if it's feasible. And if you decided you wanted to do it, how could you do it? How could you implement a congestion pricing model in an existing system? What changes would you need to make? Would it work? Could you do it? So right now we have a lot of questions we need answered before we say, yeah, go dogs go, we can do this. But what we're trying to do is look at holistically at the Portland-Vancouver region and say, if you want to try to do something on congestion and these corridors, and 205 and I-5 are the main ones, what would you do? How would you do it? What would it look like? And so we're trying to get those answers, listen to the smart people, listen to stakeholders, what causes people ire and what makes people happy. And so just really trying to get that pool.
I appreciate that, but I'm curious if, let's say, do any of you live on this side of the river?
No.
I wouldn't think so. If you did live here,
come frequently though.
Would you be a little? If you did live here, would you be a little leery about this? Would you feel that it's unfairly targeting Southwest Washington? Because our local congresswoman has been very outspoken, believing that it does unfairly target Southwest Washington.
It kind of just seems like it's part of the solution Seattle has already started to navigate down in terms of addressing its congestion issues up there. I mean, it's the same scenario. I mean, the biggest problem we're dealing with is 115 people moving to the Portland metropolitan region per day, and a lot of those people are bringing cars. And then you have the report that just came out and the impact that Lyft and Uber is having on our infrastructure, which is kind of essentially becoming more detrimental as opposed to being beneficial, or what it was originally intended to do, is creating this whole new plethora of dynamics that we have to figure out what we're going to do. And from a commission standpoint, all this information is great and beneficial, but the big piece here is what policies are going to be necessary to assure that moving forward with the system and the users of those systems actually have a better experience as opposed to sitting behind somebody else with red lights, right?
Well, then along those lines, and again, playing devil's advocate here, and I realize you're just following the mandate of the legislature. But if that were the primary concern, why aren't they talking about 217 and Highway 26?
Everything's on the table for us. We have to do this first because we have a timeline. There's nothing preventing us from doing congestion pricing in those corridors, and we will be looking at it as we move forward. So, and throughout the state and in other areas other than Portland conceivably. But it's, from our standpoint, we have the whole state. And again, if we weren't politically divided, we'd be looking at, if you look at a map, where's the congestion? Vancouver's got, this bridge in this area is a big chunk of it, and it would be bright red. And we are open to your suggestions, your solutions, and answers on how to address it, and really, what would you guys like to do? How do you want to do it? And I'm just, we can't imagine that people really want to do nothing about it. So we're open to if you guys have creative answers, let's hear them. Yeah.
Then another concern that has been brought up here is that if Oregon implements this, and that would involve a big chunk of any available transportation money, would this harm future chances of fixing the I-5 bridge?
No.
But how would they go about it? If you already start tolls on I-5 and 205 for specific projects, where would the money come from to redo the bridge?
So we're not talking about specific projects on I-5.
But eventually
talking about
you will.
managing. But right now we're talking about managing congestion. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about congestion pricing, that's what we mean, is that the whole system is designed to reduce congestion. And tolls in the historic sense that you were talking about earlier, that was to raise money, mm-hmm. right? And so we don't know if we're going to have an option that raises a lot of extra money.
Okay.
We don't know yet what this is.
Is that something, will you guys define what projects the funds go to, or will that be beyond?
We will, ultimately.
Okay.
And we've made no such determination, but clearly there's huge need here, and I think to your question, at some point, and we're not, and I think to Mandy's point, these are separate conversations, but at some point they will be overlapping and merging conversations, and I think it's something we'll address. And clearly, a bridge is done in complete partnership with Washington, as we've seen.
Yeah, obviously.
And if one.
More complex than you guys.
Yeah, and I think if one single, as we've seen, if one single component of it's not on board, it doesn't happen. But I think how the one thing that the project did say is that it can't be done without tolling, right? It can't be. That's one of the ways to pay for it. So we're not answering that question now, and I think you'll have to look at. How do you adjust and how do you intermix tolling and congestion pricing at that point? So if we come back to a bridge discussion, I think that's something. It's a discussion we have to consider.
We're not going to preclude any of those future conversations.
Yeah, it'll happen when we get back to that. But
Jamie Butler said, where you're sitting down and said, well, if ODOT and Oregon goes ahead with congestion pricing, that's going to use up their ability to raise any user fees to pay for their portion of the bridge. It means that there will be no bridge ever.
I think we make those tweaks when it happens. And again, I think our best model of doing it is the Seattle area. And I think we just have, and I think you just have to look at how did they do it there? What problems did they have? What issues did they have? How did they create new capacity? How did they change behavior? How did they invest in transit? How did they toll bridges versus creating corridors for congestion pricing? And how do they variably implement tolls? And as an Oregon driver, if I go to Seattle, I pay for it. I'm using those without prejudice to where I live. I pay for a system I'm using, and I think for us that's kind of one of our closest and best models that we keep looking at. What can we learn from it, and what do other parts of the country, what do other parts of the world do to do it? I mean, London's doing the most aggressive congestion pricing we've ever seen. It just, it's going to be very expensive to take a car into there and to get people to use alternatives. And I think part of the question is, are we creating viable alternatives for people to use? But I think we really are trying to look at this holistically and without prejudice to where people live. And if you're using it and putting wear and tear on it, that's who's going to pay. And I think that's our objective, and trying not to take options off the table in the discussion.
And I think the key here is, prior to us submitting our proposal to Federal Highways, I mean, the key is to make sure we have all hands on deck and all opinions out there and all suggestions and everything that we can possibly incorporate into this conversation, into our proposal, to ensure that we have the best thing that we can put forward for the Federal Highways. That'll be in the best interest of our users in our particular region where the congestion is worse.
And to clarify, so you'll come up with a plan because it's I-5 and 205 are federal highways. You would need approval from the federal government.
Correct.
So,
Depending, and
Depending.
that approval depends on, again, what the concept is. So there's some tolling that's allowed to be implemented under current statute, and some where we would need additional approvals.
additional approvals, just how? From an act of Congress or?
From USDOT.
Okay. Hey, have you made any inquiries? Have you gotten any feedback from the federal government about what they're thinking about this?
They sit on our advisory committee as well, and so they're there to offer their advice and input through that process. All of our committee meetings, just so you guys know too, if you haven't already, are online.
Right.
We're live streaming them, and then they're also available in an archive format. So if you are interested in that, but yes, we're having ongoing conversations with them about that.
And we make sure we take a concerted effort for the public comment periods, for people to voice their concerns or opinions or suggestions related to the conversation we're going into for those PAC meetings. So very transparent.
I am hoping that the solutions we come up with together, and they're viable for this area, because I just think it's not, regardless of what license plate's on your car, I just have to think that no one likes sitting in traffic, right? And if we can keep people in commerce moving more freely, that's the objective. But it's just not.
Again,
it's not easy. It's not easy.
If people here see benefits, they would be on board with it.
I think our objective is to try to highlight and to articulate those benefits, and which is really to address the congestion, and it's just not taking anything off the table before we've really looked at the viability, and we haven't come to a point where we've said, okay, as a commission, let's do this. Now, what does it look like? So we have a lot of work to do before we can implement anything, right? About what does it look like? How do you do it? How do you? And again, I think our model is you guys. So I think we have a long way to go. We're early in the discussion. We don't want to take options off the table before we've truly assessed whether or not they work and whether they're viable and can be implemented. So come drive through Portland and you'll understand. But I think it's something we want to look at in the region and want to be partners in the discussion here.
The Seattle area, I try not to go to Seattle too much because there's too much traffic, right?
Exactly.
So where I have seen the congestion pricing and things are places that seem to have gotten new projects. There's been a lane added, or in the case of the 520 bridge, it was rebuilt entirely across Lake Washington. Yeah. Is that kind of a national model for how congestion pricing and tolling is implemented? There's a project right alongside of it, and you can opt in to pay for it, or you can use the old infrastructure?
It is certainly a model that we are looking at very closely. It is, and I think, and especially giving choices to people, they can say, hey, you can take this route and you're probably going to spend a lot more time in traffic, or you can pay little money and you can get an easier lane. I mean, it's, and again, we've got to look at the feasibility of that. Can it be done? Do we have that? Can we do it? Mm-hmm. So I think it is definitely a model. We are trying to study and assess everything. But
as far as
yes.
you can tell, is it the typical model for projects around the country?
I don't know that there's a typical. Is
Okay.
there's a gazillion different models, and I think we're trying to learn from all of them and say, how does our unique landscape play into this, and can we do something with it? Rolando, anything?
You're on fire.
Shut the guy up.
You mentioned like business transportation, trucks, delivery trucks. Or what about C-Tran? Have you discussed any breaks on the pricing for heavy users like that, and especially those who facilitate commerce? Does that come up?
Well, I think.
Again,
Go ahead.
I mean, we haven't gotten into those specifics
Okay.
entirely, but I think, again, all options have to be on the table at this point. And I think the key is really to try to find ways to incentivize transit usage. I mean, the idea of an urban, dense development model is to get people obviously out of vehicles so they can enjoy the walkability and livability of the community. But all those options still have to be defined and played out and, discussed more in depth. But, again, obviously, your guys' constituents who are part of the PAC and others that are involved and engaged in this, I think their input is going to be vital to that conversation as well.
Obviously, there's a lot of rail, there's a lot of truck commerce. The river's getting used pretty extensively. It's not necessarily being used for passenger commuters like some other areas. If you look at in the Northeast, and so for us, it's like, what are your options to move people and goods? So you've got rail, you've got roadway, you've got water, and you've got air, and are you utilizing all of them? And what are the options? So I think we still are, by nature, forced to use automobiles quite a bit here, right? So
I think, again, to play devil's advocate, I think a lot of critics up here would say this is just a ploy by Oregon to, again, try and get light rail over here, which some people think that critics or that voters up here have rejected numerous times. Many people up here are strongly opposed to light rail. So how do you answer the allegation that this is just a ploy by Oregon to force light rail upon us?
Could I ask, why are people so opposed to light rail?
If we had more time, yes, you could. A lot of people up here are staunchly opposed to it, and to some
The
extent,
perception is very costly, and also that criminals are
Yes,
abundant.
that is the
Crime
perception.
is abundant on the train, and it would bring crime to
Yes.
Vancouver.
And I'm not
They're not
defending
safe
or
to ride.
agreeing with that perception. I'm just telling you what it is.
We did hear from people at our open house in Vancouver that they would love that opportunity. So, there also is
Oh, there is.
definitely
Yeah.
the other side of that
Yeah,
opinion
absolutely.
there as well.
But I think incentivizing transit use,
Mhm.
whether that's if it's C-Tran, those are kinds of things that we want to be supportive of. I'm not sure how you make the jump to it's gonna somehow force light rail.
yeah.
So I can't quite answer that question because I'm not sure I understand the premise of how
I
they've
think,
got there.
and I'm not sure I understand it either. I'm just
Okay.
trying to represent
Yeah.
some
No.
constituents up here.
I would love to
Um,
understand it so that I could respond more,
Sure.
more about
Yeah,
it.
understandable.
But I think in congestion pricing and value pricing, we're really looking at how does it affect motorists, and
Right.
obviously transit comes into play as, is it a viable option to get out of your car to use
But I
transit?
think critics
So-
would say, see, the goal is to get people out of their cars. And they're doing everything to make me pay for using my car. I don't want to get out of my car. And again, that's what critics would say. And they would allege that this is a way to foist light rail upon Clark County.
Yeah, well, I think it's not how I've been thinking about it, but I mean maybe others are, but I think and for us it's really a matter of how do you deal with people spending a lot of time in traffic, and what are our options to try to alleviate that pressure as our population continues to grow. So I know how one could make that leap. I'm not making that leap. I think you again have to just look at what are the options we have on the table and how do you pay for it. And if you're putting wear and tear on the system, you should be contributing to its maintenance, upkeep, investment, expansion, whatever it happens to be, and so that's how I'm looking at it. Is how do we get those who benefit from the system paying for the system, and what's the best system to help meet the growing demands of our great area here, right? And as people keep moving in, we're not keeping pace on infrastructure, and we've got to look at and we've got to look at maybe we'll get a windfall with big infrastructure bill out of the feds, but we're not holding our breath.
That'd be great.
Yeah, we're not holding
So
our
I'm
breath.
kind of hearing a couple of misperceptions on the parts of some people. Then number one is that this congestion pricing is not yet linked to any specific project. So that
No.
And another thing is that Washington residents would not pay any different than what an Oregon resident would to use the system. So depending on it, of course, that would depend on where they drive. So, but if you drove from Tualatin to Cruz Way every day, there's a possibility you could pay there. There's also a possibility you could pay if you go from Jansen Beach to Lloyd Center every day. So those are not decided yet. Is that correct?
Totally correct. We're conceptualizing right now, and seeing if it works and the viability and how you do it. So and we have a mandate from the legislature to look at these corridors first, and that's what we're doing. And that's
and typically when you look at other places that have done this, if you take a stretch, say from Vancouver, say to the Rose Quarter, normally how many different tolls would be in a stretch of that length?
Again, I think it's pure speculation on how you could do it, right?
Yeah, it depends also on what your objective are. Are you trying to raise money? Are you trying to manage traffic? If you're trying to manage traffic, you're likely looking at that entire segment based on when people get on or get off.
Mm-hmm.
If you've used the 405 express lanes up in Seattle, there's certain points where you can enter. It tells you on a sign how much you're going to have to pay. And then it tells you when you're done with that toll area.
Okay.
So there's a lot of variety for how you would set up the system.
And because if you're looking at from here to the Rose Quarter, a lot of people are going to get off at 405 there and not go through the Rose Quarter. So I think there could be a lot of variables.
Right. But usually you would look at where people enter and exit.
Okay.
So you'd set up gantries or other systems that you'd be able to figure out where people are going.
And will you also consider pricing on 405 through town?
We're looking at I-5 and I-205 for this process.
Okay. Yeah, but all of it's on the table down the road, right? We're looking at this first. Whether or not we do it and look at it elsewhere is an open question. But
I can remember some improvements made on I-84 and maybe a few things in North Portland on I-5, but it seems to me like most of the infrastructure of I-205 and I-5 is up to 60 years old, some of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking I think that maybe that Rose Quarter was maybe designed in the 1950s or 60s, and I don't remember ever seeing too much improvement other places in the corridor, with the exception of maybe just before Jansen Beach through the Delta Park area there. Is that, I'll talk a little bit about that.
I'll let Ryan take that one. But you've definitely tapped on the we haven't kept up, I think is clear.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah, and part of the reason for not doing that is that we haven't really kept up with investing in just maintaining our bridges and our pavements and other things. Just the cost is going up, and so how do you manage those? But just quickly on improvements. So you mentioned Delta Park. That was several years ago, but that was that additional lane that sort of carried the through down, which was a big deal. But there's some new lanes that are coming actually this summer. We have 2 lanes that are going to start construction at the 84 and 205, so on that eastern side.
Oh, that's a mess over there.
It is an area that does not operate as well as we hope. That's how I describe it. You can call it a mess, but so there are lanes from 84 north and south there, and then also coming in from the east side that run north. So
would that be 85 west to 205 north? Would that be part of that?
So 84, as you're headed westbound, there'll be a lane that goes to the north.
Oh,
All right, Columbia Boulevard there, and that will help with a lot of the merging and weaving.
yeah, that's
It
kind
also-
of dangerous. Right
It also helps because there's a lot of freight that comes from the east side that then
Yes.
goes up and just gets off at Columbia. So if you can keep
Right.
them out of the main flow, you're gonna see some improved
That's a
benefit.
big story for us.
The other one that is coming in is as you come 84 and you go southbound, we're going to continue that lane. That runs all the way. It will run all the way down to
Alright.
Powell Boulevard. So again, folks, we're just trying to make that.
Only lane now.
Yeah, and again, a lot of that merging and weaving really has an effect on how much throughput you're getting in those through
Right.
lanes.
And I'm
The
sorry, did you mention 84 eastbound to 205 north?
84. So 84
Turning
eastbound.
south.
So sorry, eastbound to 205 north. That lane will. It will feed into that same lane that's being built from the other direction. So
Okay.
the lane actually will start where
That
the
would be
volumes
great.
come on
That's-
there.
yeah, that's
Right,
the
and go in.
night.
Yeah, and we just made an improvement a few years ago on 84 that moved folks out of the, gave folks a place
Right.
to be out of the way so that 84
Right.
could function a
Yeah,
little bit better.
that was necessary.
Yeah, and then there's another lane that's also coming. It'll be the next year. That is from Powell Boulevard up to 84, and so
Is this
that's
all
where
part of that
large
HB
volumes come on.
2017?
No, these are actually well. The last lane I just mentioned is a part of that. The other two lanes are part of our existing program that just we plan projects out 4 years.
Right.
You don't get to see the benefit of them for quite a while,
Right.
but these are finally coming, and we're also doing, and those are being delivered as part of paving projects. So they'll get new asphalt all through there as well. And but those improvements, while it's not adding another through lane, it is helping with all of that merging and weaving and people trying to get just from 84 to the port areas.
Sure.
So those are going to see some improvements soon.
How about 84 westbound? Would it be possible to get an exit ramp somewhere between 181st and 42nd?
You're jumping to a whole nother level of how about a new interchange and interstate access plan. There's a lot of reasons now that we are trying to manage the number of interchanges we have.
Mm-hmm.
We have some facilities, if you've been on, for example, 217, where there's interchanges every couple of.
Sure. Yeah.
It feels like feet. It's a little more than that, and those create a lot of operational problems in
Sure.
terms of how that thing
Yeah,
functions.
I
So,
can understand that.
yeah.
Bottom line is,
But that gap between interchanges on 84 westbound, that's
Yeah.
extreme. I mean, isn't that highly unusual?
There's a railroad.
Well, we're getting a little off.
Right.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
I
and we're getting a little off
understand.
topic. But actually, I think the interchange spacing standard from the federal government is between 2 and 3 miles. Which should be the standard between interchanges. It's not what we have when we built this system, and I think we've learned from that putting
Sure.
a few of those can create problems.
we can't do enough fast enough, and
Oh,
and we're playing catch up all over the place, and we can't buy our way out of congestion, right? It's just we have the population has just grown exponentially faster than we have invested, and we've figured out ways to pay for. So I think we're looking for more answers here. I know we're not coming to you with all the solutions, but just not looking to take anything off the table as we try to do this. But so anyway, that's kind of our objective, and I think it's a tough task, but Oregon, again following Washington, has tried to do stuff at the state level to legislatively find resources and invest and kind of do something big and bold. And I think getting legislation through in this political environment is a on a bipartisan, bicameral basis for us is a big move, and coming up with $5.3 billion to invest in this is big for us. So I think we're looking at how do we give people the best return on investment on that. What new tools have they given us to try to manage it and improve the quality of life for people? And I don't think there is any intent to make that worse or a bigger burden for people here than it is for people there. And I think that the overall objective is to improve the quality of life, ease congestion, and make sure that our infrastructure investments doing a better job at keeping up with population growth. And I think we're behind the ball there, and we're trying to play catch up. And And what the Oregon State Legislature did and the governor is a big, significant achievement. But we know if they had done triple or quadruple that, it still wouldn't solve the problem. But it's a step in the right direction, and I think we're just trying to look at what tools have they given us that will help. So.
Yeah.
When you come back a year from today to talk to us again, what are you going to say has been accomplished, or what do you hope to say has been accomplished, and where we'll be at in the process?
I'm hoping that we've completed our modeling and feasibility, and that we've done some beta testing to say, here's what we're looking at, and here's what we're going to move forward with. And probably in a year's time, I'm hoping that we have a design on what could work, or we come here and say it's not going to work.
You mean in terms of specific pricing proposals?
Yeah, exactly. So that we've taken a significant step forward in defining what a model in this region could look like, and I think timeline-wise, that's where we are.
I would hope that we actually have a concrete example of how both states can work in unison to achieve a shared outcome.
That would be cool. Great. Well, anything else? I don't have any more questions.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming in. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Of course.
Thank you. For making the time.
Absolutely. Thank you for making the time. Indeed.